So today's web dev tip, we're going to be carrying on with our end-to-end project, and we're back in Visual Studio Code because we're going to write a bit of code just to get started with the API before we actually start setting up the server and pushing any code to it. So what we're going to do is actually set up how the redirect will be generated, how the actual URL will be set up. So we're going to do that in the main.ts file in this tutorial, just so you can get an idea of how to add a new endpoint to the API within our Express app. So here we've just got one endpoint at the moment, and it's a get endpoint, obviously denoted by the get function here. And then obviously the endpoint is /API. So to add a new one, all we need to do is say app.get, because we're going to be using another get request to get a new URL. And then we can say, again, we want to maybe put it after the API, after that /API. So we could have something like maybe short URL is the resource that we're requesting. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to return a URL with a random string attached to it. So let's fill out the rest of the function. So if you're not familiar with Express and the way its routing and controllers work, basically once you've specified the endpoint that you're setting up, it takes a callback that has these two arguments inside of here, so request and response. So the request object gives you access to anything that's incoming from the browser, so things like any headers, any user agent strings that are provided, for example, or any additional information that the browser has decided to send with the request, and you can access that all inside this request object. And also inside of the response object, we've got the ability to then send a response back to the browser. So that's why Express is really powerful, because it makes this process really simple. Because we're using TypeScript here as well, we can actually type these objects as they're being passed in. We just need to make sure that we're actually importing the right interface. So here you can see this one's from Express, so I believe that's the right one. And we can maybe shorten that just by making sure this is imported in our import statement here. So rather than express.request, we can add another import statement here and just import request from Express. And that just shortens that a little bit. And we're also going to want the response object as well. So let's just make sure we've got that. And then we can type that here. And that just means when we access the request object, for example, you can see all of the different properties and functions that are available on top of that request object that's coming in. But we don't really need to worry about that for our purposes. We just want to return the response object with a particular function. So we'll say return response dot, and I'm going to return some JSON so that it's available in our front-end application. So whatever we end up using, we'll be able to consume the JSON. So it doesn't matter whether it's Angular, React, or anything else, we can still consume that JSON. So it's kind of making it fairly independent of what our front-end framework will be. So we've got res.json, and then we just pass in a body. So I'm just going to say it's got an object which has a property of URL. And just to start us off, we'll just say it's localhost, and the port number is going to be 3333, and we want to say it's going to send us back to the API, and we just need to generate a random string name. So you can create your own function to create a random string. However, there's obviously lots of different npm packages that can do this for you. So this one that I found here for node random string, just npm install random string. We can see it's pretty up to date. It was published a few months ago, and you can see how many downloads it's got as well. So it's obviously quite a popular and trusted package, and you can see here in the usage that it's pretty simple to use. So let's go with that one, and we'll install that into our project rather than writing our own function. So npm install random string. Just let that do its thing, and now it's installed. So let's import that. So the format, as you can see, it's using a CommonJS require statement here, but because we're using TypeScript, hopefully this should work just like this. So import random string from random string, and that's not giving us any problems, so hopefully that's going to work okay for us. So let's generate the random string within the GET request. So we'll say the random string is equal to random string, and I think we might need to call a generate function on that. So random string dot generate, and it looks like you can just specify the number of characters that you want. So we should be able to get a decent combination with, say, 6 characters, so we'll just go with that for now. And now let's actually include this in the URL. Just change this to a template literal, and then just pop that random string after the end of the API. Okay, so if we save that, our server should now reload. And now if we go to the endpoint of / short URL, we should see a URL property and an object supplied back to us with some random string generated. So let's just give that a go in the browser. So we've got a call to the API, and we'll just say short URL. Okay, and we're actually getting an error here. So we're reading this generate property from undefined. So that basically means that this random string function hasn't been imported correctly. So it might be that it doesn't have a default export as I was expecting it to. So let's just change that import statement here. Hopefully that's rebuilt. And we'll go back to the browser and reload. And there you go, when it reloads, we've got an object supplied back to us. So we've got some JSON with a URL property. And as you can see, it's got that localhost URL reference, obviously with a random string on the end. So this is the kind of thing that we're going to be generating on the back end, providing to the front end user who's clicking to generate one of these URLs. And ultimately, this is what will be supplied to the second user within this project, who will then click the link and then be redirected somewhere else. So that's the first step in our project to actually generate those URLs. In the next step, we're going to actually look at persisting these into a database. So we'll get a database set up and save this URL into there. And then when the other user actually clicks one of these links, the system will know about it because it will be able to retrieve this information from the database. But that's it for this tutorial. Make sure you stay tuned for more web dev tips.